Can a single Ukrainian fighter jet rewrite the rulebook of modern air warfare? On a fog-drenched morning over the Dnipro Basin, radar operators on both sides detected an anomaly. One Su-27 flanker flying unnaturally low, hugging the terrain like a ghost. Its mission: infiltrate Russian-controlled airspace and strike a heavily fortified airbase once considered untouchable. But what made this mission extraordinary wasn't the aircraft, it was the technology welded beneath its wings. According to Defense News and Reuters, the Su-27 was retrofitted with Western guidance technology, allowing it to carry precision small-diameter bombs (SDBs). Engineers had improvised welded BRU-61 racks to adapt the NATO standard GBU-39 munitions to a Soviet airframe, and engineering gamble that could have catastrophic aerodynamic consequences. The operation required perfect timing turbulence along the low-level Ingress route, the strain on the hardpoints, and a constant risk of radar exposure. The pilot, shielded by a Gardenia electronic countermeasure pod, danced along the radar horizon, evading both Russian S-400 and Buk M3 networks. This wasn't just a strike, it was a test of how legacy Soviet systems could be fused with Western precision weaponry. The fusion of incompatible systems under combat conditions is a hallmark of Ukraine's adaptation, remarked retired Air Marshal Peter Rudd from the Royal United Services Institute. It's one thing to retrofit equipment in a lab, it's another to do it while the enemy's radar is painting you. Real-time flight data from open-source trackers suggested the Su-27 approached at under 50 meters altitude, exploiting terrain masking to hide from radar. Its radar cross-section at that altitude dropped by more than 80%, rendering it nearly invisible to ground-based tracking until the final seconds of approach. With Gardenia ECM active, it created a false radar signature offset by several kilometers, forcing Russian defenses to aim at phantoms. Military analysts at Jane's Defense Weekly noted that the mission required a delicate balance between fuel management and electrical load. The improvised systems drew heavily on the aircraft's auxiliary power, leaving little margin for error. Any malfunction could have caused an immediate avionics failure or engine flameout. Yet the Su-27 pressed on, proving that hybrid engineering under wartime stress could yield game-changing capabilities. As it neared the strike zone, the pilot had to calculate a narrow corridor between Russian early warning radar beams. Satellite imagery confirmed that the route had been scouted days earlier using US-supplied reconnaissance data integrated into Ukraine's Delta command system. This coordination reflected not only Ukrainian ingenuity, but also the subtle evolution of NATO's battlefield data-sharing strategy support without direct engagement. By the time the jet reached its release point, the Russian base still believed it was secure. No missile alarms had sounded. The flanker rose sharply to 2,000 meters, briefly breaking the radar horizon long enough to acquire GPS lock for its GBU-39s. In that fleeting instant, the entire operation balanced on precision, physics, and courage. If a decades-old Soviet fighter could deliver Western precision weapons through one of the most contested skies on Earth, what does that say about the future of hybrid warfare? And could this improvised model redefine NATO's approach to arming allied nations under fire? The moment the Su-27 climbed into its pop-up maneuver, the Russian base's radar operators finally caught a glimpse of something fast, high, and unusual. But by then, the pilot had already executed what Western tacticians now call the Kinematic dead zone Gambit, a narrow altitude band where Russian S-400 interceptors momentarily lose optimal lock due to radar curvature and missile burnout timing. In other words, the jet was there and gone before the interceptors could readjust. As BBC defense correspondent Jonathan Beale reported in October 2025, Ukrainian pilots have been trained by NATO instructors to use these micro windows, exploiting the physics of radar dead zones and the mechanical lag of surface-to-air missile batteries. In this case, the Su-27 climbed steeply to build kinetic energy, briefly broke radar silence, then released 4 precision bombs in quick succession. Sensors recorded a sudden flash of electromagnetic activity, the telltale sign of AL-31F engines in maximum afterburn. But the most daring part wasn't the climb, it was what came next. As soon as the weapons released, the pilot inverted, pulled a -G dive, and dropped altitude faster than Russian fire control could compute trajectory data. Chaff and flares cascaded through the air, APP-50 cartridges flaring in rapid sequence, blinding infrared trackers. The electronic countermeasure pod flooded the spectrum with decoy signals, spoofing missile guidance algorithms. Russian operators later admitted they fired 2 interceptors at phantom targets, drifting 20 kilometers off course. At Jane's, Defense Weekly analysts compared this to Cold War pop-up and punch strategies, but with a modern twist, Ukrainian pilots are integrating NATO-style mission planning into Soviet hardware. What made this engagement remarkable was the fusion of Western precision with Eastern aggression, a marriage of tactics that challenges traditional doctrines on both sides. The West provides the brain, the East provides the muscle-noted air combat strategist Daniel Kearns. That combination is lethal. Meanwhile, telemetry shared through NATO's satellite network indicated that the GBU-39 bombs, though released outside their optimal envelope, still managed stable flight. Their glide wings deployed flawlessly, and inertial navigation engaged despite the dense jamming in the area. Russian S-400 operators attempted to reacquire the Su-27 on radar, but low-altitude interference from the terrain scattered their signal returns. By the time the data reconciled, the Ukrainian jet had already vanished below 200 meters, a radar-shadowed ghost racing back toward friendly airspace. In Moscow, military bloggers began questioning how a single aging airframe could penetrate what Russia once called the most impregnable air defense zone in Europe. Western observers pointed to deeper implications. Perhaps the S-400's effectiveness depends not just on hardware, but on real-time coordination, something Ukraine has learned to disrupt through electronic warfare and precision timing. As DW Military Watch commented, this wasn't just about outflying missiles, it was about outthinking a network. The pilot relying on a fraction of fuel reserves and no mid-air refueling had demonstrated that advanced planning and terrain exploitation could level the playing field against a numerically superior force. So the question remains, if a single fighter using hybrid technology and split-second maneuvering can blind an entire defense grid for 30 seconds, what could an entire squadron achieve under coordinated NATO data support? As the 4 GBU-39s cut through the upper atmosphere, each became a silent argument for precision over power. Unlike traditional bombs that rely on brute force, these small-diameter bombs are built for intelligence. 130 kilograms of aerodynamic efficiency guided by encrypted GPS and refined through micro-inertial systems. Their flight computers ran continuous Kalman filtering, correcting for GPS jamming in real time. According to Reuters Defense Analysis, October 2025, Ukraine's strike planners had anticipated spectrum warfare and preloaded frequency hopping algorithms compatible with both NATO and domestic Ukrainian encryption standards. The glide began at 46 miles from the target. High-altitude crosswinds buffeted the SDBs, but the smart bombs adjusted automatically using micro-rudder pulses less than a tenth of a second apart. Midway through the descent, Russian electronic warfare units activated broadband jammers designed to scramble satellite feeds. Yet the bombs never lost coherence. They switched navigation modes from GPS to INS, then to terrain correlation, a capability borrowed from Western updates integrated with Ukraine's DeltaNet system. This phase of the mission revealed the new frontier of warfare: algorithm versus algorithm. One side jammed frequencies, the other side rerouted computation paths. It's no longer pilot versus pilot, remarked Dr. Samuel Lee, a NATO cyber warfare consultant cited by The Guardian. It's code versus code, and Ukraine's software engineers are learning faster than anyone expected. A K-52 Alligator helicopter patrol returning from a separate engagement nearly crossed paths with one of the gliding munitions. The onboard radar briefly detected a small object at subsonic speed, but its automatic threat classifier dismissed it as bird interference. That fraction of miscalculation sealed the helicopter's fate. Seconds later, a blast wave shredded its rotors as it hovered too close to the impact vector. Inside the Russian base, alarms triggered sporadically. The local Tor M2 defense battery misinterpreted the radar signature of the incoming bombs. Their radar cross-section was too small, their approach angle too shallow. The system's software tagged them as debris from a failed drone swarm. The base's Panzer S1 unit offline for maintenance at the time never fired. By the time the error was realized, 3 bombs were already within lethal range. Defense News later reported that this engagement exposed a fundamental flaw in modern integrated air defense systems: automation fatigue. When computers make too many low-threat classifications, human operators grow desensitized and their reaction time stretches. The Ukrainians had exploited that psychological lag with machine learning precision. As the SDBs entered their terminal phase, each adjusted for final alignment. Their electro-optical seekers scanned the terrain below, matching infrared contours to pre-recorded imagery. The synchronization was surgical, an artificial swarm guided not by human eyes, but by the mathematics of correlation. At 2,400 feet, they split formation diving towards separate targets: a fuel depot, a maintenance hangar, a command post, and the northern barracks. Every impact would send shockwaves across both the physical and digital battlefield. If these bombs could outthink radar, deceive algorithms, and survive in the heart of one of the most hostile airspace zones in the world, what does that mean for the next generation of warfare where software may prove deadlier than steel? When the first explosion thundered across the Russian airfield, surveillance footage captured what military analysts now call a point defense paralysis. Despite having Tor and Tunguska systems on site, not a single intercept was recorded. The reason wasn't lack of firepower, it was physics and timing. Point defense systems are designed to intercept high-speed threats closing at predictable angles, not low RCS precision munitions gliding laterally through radar clutter. According to BBC News Europe, October 2025, the strike revealed how small glide bombs can expose the blind spots of even layered defense networks. Tor missiles built for short-range intercepts have a minimum engagement altitude of around 50 meters. By the time the GBU-39s dropped below that threshold, their radar signature was indistinguishable from background interference. The automated targeting radar couldn't distinguish between a bird flock metal debris or an incoming weapon until milliseconds before impact. The base's Panzer S-1 crews scrambled, but the system's radar was still recalibrating from a software update. Reports later confirmed that 2 operators had manually switched the unit into standby mode after false detections earlier that night. The lag proved fatal. In the final 7 seconds before impact, the air defense grid produced 5 independent radar tracks, but all too late for a firing solution. As Defense News noted, this wasn't an equipment malfunction, it was a human technology disconnect. Point defenses rely on reaction speed, measured in seconds. The SDBs compressed that window to milliseconds, explained defense analyst Michael Kaufman. By the time the system realized what was happening, physics had already made the decision. From a tactical standpoint, Ukraine had just conducted one of the most efficient cost exchange operations in recent military history. 4 bombs worth under $160,000 each bypassed a defense system valued at over $500 million. The impact wasn't just material, it was psychological. For Russian crews, the idea that billion-dollar systems could be outmaneuvered by software-guided bombs shook confidence across multiple sectors of their defense apparatus. At NATO headquarters in Brussels, the footage became required viewing for air defense analysts. The Ukrainian strike illustrated the next phase of asymmetric warfare, when precision and timing, not raw power, define victory. DW Military Watch commented that the event marked the convergence of old-school courage and modern computation. But while Ukrainian pilots and engineers celebrated a tactical triumph, strategists across Europe began asking deeper questions. If traditional missile shields can't reliably stop small smart bombs, what does that mean for NATO air bases near conflict zones? How many of these blind angles exist across the alliance's defense grids? Pentagon insiders confirmed that after reviewing satellite footage, US analysts began recalibrating simulations for Patriot and NASAM systems. The focus shifted toward integrated radar fusion and AI-assisted reaction chains, a sign that the West recognized the need to evolve faster than ever before. For Ukraine, the victory went beyond the blast craters. It signaled a doctrine shift from reactive defense to proactive disruption. With each successful strike, Kyiv wasn't just weakening Russian logistics, it was rewriting the global manual on how to defeat point defense systems without stealth aircraft. Could this mean that in the wars of tomorrow, stealth might no longer be about invisibility, but about timing software and deception instead? The inferno that erupted inside the Russian airbase was unlike anything local responders had trained for. The FMU-152 fuse on each GBU-39 had been programmed with delayed detonation, allowing the bombs to burrow deep into structures before igniting their AFX-757 high-energy explosives. The result wasn't a conventional blast, it was a sequence of underground shockwaves designed to amplify overpressure within confined spaces. Satellite imagery analyzed by Jane's Defense Weekly, October 2025, confirmed what Ukrainian planners had intended: synchronized strikes across multiple axes. axes. One bomb punched through the concrete roof of the maintenance hangar, another ignited the fuel depot, while the third obliterated the barracks where command staff had sought shelter. The fourth, detonating just outside the runway, cratered the taxiway, halting all flight operations for days. The science behind the devastation was cold and clinical. AFX 757, a next-generation explosive compound, generates over 7,000 meters per second in detonation velocity, creating an overpressure shock that can rupture reinforced walls and melt internal wiring. When detonated in tandem, the wave interference multiplies the destructive radius. For comparison, Defense News reported that the combined impact produced a pressure zone equivalent to a 1,000 kilogram conventional bomb, despite each munition weighing a fraction of that. As the flames consumed the hangar, the internal fuel reservoirs detonated one by one, sending white phosphorus-like plumes into the air. Within minutes, secondary explosions rocked the site ammunition stores, drone fuel tanks, and command electronics igniting in sequence. Russian emergency crews were overwhelmed, unable to approach due to the residual heat and collapsing infrastructure. At The Guardian, military technology columnist Eleanor Reeve wrote, "This wasn't just destruction, it was precision architecture. Each impact maximized the internal collapse of structures rather than surface spectacle." She compared the attack's design to a scalpel strike in a world accustomed to hammers. Beyond the physical damage, the psychological toll was immense. Russian field units across southern Ukraine reportedly began dispersing their assets into smaller decentralized depots, a move that crippled supply efficiency but improved survivability. Western analysts referred to it as the post-Pavlograd Doctrine, emphasizing the trade-off between protection and logistical speed. For NATO, the event served as a field experiment in real-world data collection. Sensors embedded in the SDBs transmitted telemetry until detonation, providing rare insight into blast propagation and material stress inside hardened structures. Engineers at Ramstein Air Base reportedly used this data to refine future precision strike algorithms, adjusting detonation timing to maximize internal pressure without creating external blast signatures detectable by satellite. The implications were clear. The physics of penetration and overpressure had redefined how small payloads could deliver strategic results. Gone were the days when heavy bombers dictated victory through tonnage alone. In their place stood precision timing and mathematical orchestration, hallmarks of the digital battlefield. If miniature guided bombs can inflict the same operational paralysis once achieved by mass bombing campaigns, what happens when AI-guided swarms or hypersonic variants enter the mix? Would the next evolution of air power be about brain power rather than firepower? Within hours of the attack, the Russian Ministry of Defense acknowledged what it called localized damage, but satellite footage told a different story. Hangars reduced to metallic skeletons, command shelters gutted, and black plumes marking a strike too precise to be dismissed as luck. What followed was a rapid doctrinal recalibration across the Russian military. Point defenses were no longer being rearranged, they were being reimagined. As DW Military Watch October 2025 reported, Russian engineers began developing denser shored layers, stacking systems like Panzer Tor and Strela across overlapping altitude bands, hoping to close the gaps that SDBs had exploited. Mobile radar units were deployed on rotating schedules, forcing Ukraine's strike planners to adapt daily. Yet every adjustment seemed reactive, not innovative. "You can't outbuild math," said U.S. Air Force strategist Colonel Mark Ellison, speaking to Defense News. "The Ukrainians aren't fighting the systems, they're fighting the logic that runs them." In Kiev, the successful hybridization of Western munitions on Soviet airframes became a national rallying symbol. Engineers continued modifying flankers' fulcrums and even aging Su-24s to carry precision-guided weapons once deemed incompatible. According to Reuters' October defense brief, over 70 such hybrid missions had been conducted since mid-2025, with a 78% target success rate, the highest in any active conflict. The strike also redefined how NATO viewed arms assistance. Instead of delivering entirely new platforms, Western defense firms began focusing on plug-in packages, modular pods, and data link interfaces adaptable to legacy aircraft. This approach, cost-efficient and fast, could allow partner nations to field near fifth-generation capabilities without the political risks of direct equipment transfers. The Ukrainians proved that you don't need an F-35 to perform F-35-level precision, commented RAND analyst Jason Wolf. You just need a software bridge and courage. Meanwhile, the US Department of Defense confirmed that Ukraine's tactics had influenced updates to American and NATO air combat simulations. Emphasis shifted toward multi-domain resilience, distributed radar nodes, decoy emissions, and preemptive ECM bursts designed to overload enemy sensors before real attacks began. The Guardian described it as the age of algorithmic warfare, where timing terrain and code shape outcomes more than tonnage or troop counts. In Moscow, military theorists quietly debated whether the future battlefield belonged not to pilots or generals, but to software engineers and data analysts. That realization that lines of code could outmaneuver billion-dollar weapons sent shockwaves through defense circles worldwide. By late October 2025, Russian bases across Crimea were hardening infrastructure, digging deeper bunkers, and installing multi-sensor counter-jamming arrays. Yet for every adaptation, Ukraine unveiled a counter-adaptation, faster glide bombs, improved ECM timing, and integrated satellite mapping updates that refreshed every 15 minutes instead of hourly. The war had become not just a clash of armies, but a live laboratory for the next century of conflict where hybrid engineering, electronic deception, and data synchronization define survival. And as the smoke cleared over the shattered airbase, one question lingered far beyond Ukraine's borders. If an aging jet and 4 smart bombs can rewrite the doctrine of modern warfare, what happens when artificial intelligence takes command of the sky? The Ukrainian Su-27 strike demonstrated how technology, ingenuity, and timing now define the modern battlefield. Through improvised integration of Western GBU-39 bombs on a Soviet-era airframe, Ukraine achieved a surgical strike that outwitted Russia's most advanced defenses. The mission exposed the vulnerabilities of S-400 and Tor systems when faced with hybrid warfare low RCS munitions, algorithmic navigation, and electronic countermeasures working in unison. Beyond the destruction itself, the attack marked a turning point for global military strategy. NATO analysts saw proof that precision, not power, now dominates air warfare. Russia's subsequent doctrinal shifts from denser defense grids to hardened shelters highlighted how quickly technology dictates adaptation. The psychological impact was equally severe: billion-dollar systems undone by $1,000 solutions. Ultimately, this was more than a tactical victory. It was the birth of a new warfare paradigm, one where legacy machines, smart algorithms, and battlefield improvisation merge into a single digital ecosystem. The Su-27 didn't just strike a base, it struck the future.